NutriCast. Welcome to Season 4 of Transforming 45. I'm your host, Lisa Boate, and this season we're stepping fully into our power. The heat, the hormones, the heartbreak, the healing. This is Midlife, raw and redefined. Each episode, you'll hear stories of humans who are rewriting the rules, reclaiming their bodies, their desires, their voices. This is where we stop shrinking, start shining, and remember who the hell we are. Because midlife isn't a crisis, it's an awakening. Let's get transforming 45. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. This week, I'm really interested in this conversation because I think it's going to go in many different directions. So this week, I am thrilled to welcome Karen Edgett. She is a visionary creative using transformative messages and collaborations to create art and food to facilitate a more multidimensional awareness. Her mediums include words, paintings, photography, and multimedia. She has produced many books in an oracle deck and a small recipe book called Garlic Lover Dressings, all designed to expand our energetic and intuitive capacities. She also loves to race sailboats, hike, travel, swim, and dance. Karen, welcome to the show. I am so glad that you're here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for having me. It's quite the pleasure. You're doing some great work out there.
Well, thank you. It's hardly a day goes by where I don't clue somebody into something that's happening likely due to perimenopause or menopause. So it feels like a gift.
Yeah, I know. You have to run with your gifts these days. I mean, I've got some gifts that I'm always sharing too.
Okay, so Karen, tell us, who are you and how did life introduce you to this version?
Well, as you just read in my bio, I consider myself a visionary artist. Doesn't mean I'm a really big artist, but I can see things from a visionary standpoint. And I don't know, it's weird. I was raised semi-normally in a fairly large family, and I think I had my older brother was special needs, and I think I had a lot of trauma around how he became special needs because he wasn't born that way. And that drove me, I think I always didn't understand, anything anybody told me, I didn't understand that as truth. And so in the beginning of my life, I think I always was like a truth seeker on many levels, with religion, with education, with, what happened to my brother, all of it. But I was repressed because back then you didn't have access to as much truth as you have now, or the varieties of truth that you could choose your path. And I was always very repressed, and I didn't really understand my purpose. So I really didn't feel well most of my life. And I think I reached a pinnacle where I was almost saying, well, geez, I might not live another year. And then I started working with intuitives, and all the while I was kind of highly functional. It's like that alcoholic that can go to work and everybody's like, wow, he's functional. I mean, I was pretty functional. I ran an ad agency, which I enjoyed because it had a lot to do with seeking the truth out of, a product or a service that someone was offering, and the benefits for it, and communicating that with graphics and words. I mean, I've always been attracted to that. I do have a degree in fine arts. But anyway, once I got into the intuitive stuff, everything seemed to be like, wow, there's this whole area that nobody's ever talked about of access to information. And the more I got into it, and the more I discovered things, and the more I found pathways to new information, the more my old life didn't fit. So I sold my ad agency, and I stopped. I didn't know where I was going. I did some traveling, working on food farms. I started learning about nutritional food, and that with the intuitive work really helped me heal, got my physical life back. And then by then I was stuck in this more multidimensional world. So that's when I went back to my art, and I started saying, I just want to paint light. I want to understand light. I want to understand what's out there that I don't understand. Fast forward, here I am. I'm kind of intuitively driven, and connecting to all different realms of the universes, and an artist. And I would say I'm a bit of a foodie, but I'm not. I was teaching for a while, but I think I've not found a formula to teach people with the energetics, the vision, the way food can affect your ability to navigate this shifting consciousness that a lot of us are tapping into. I know how it affects them nutritionally, but not not metaphysically. And that's really where my heart is on that more metaphysical part of things. So here I am.
Yeah. There's oh gosh, there's so many things I wanna pull out of that story, but I wanna start with that idea of truths and of multiple truths because that we're seeing this unravel in so many ways in our world right
Yep.
now. So and it does seem to be midlife seems to be a place in almost every conversation I've had with guests on the show. There's a very similar pattern, right? We have all of these lived experiences, and it takes us to midlife to start to see the patterns that are emerging and that there is something else happening here on this earthly plane. And the way that I have been living is not the way I want to continue living as I move forward. So that seems to be the sort of beginning of the unraveling to reconnection. What is so interesting, and I can speak specifically about what's happening in in menopause, perimenopause world right now, is there is so much judgment around what is the one and only truth.
Yeah, that's a yeah. I have a lot to say on that.
Yeah, me too, because I get nervous anytime someone says, this is the only way. This is the truth. This is the only way. And everything else is a grift. That generally, for me, is a red flag to say there is not one truth
Well,
because we are,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
that's because you're right. There isn't one truth. And there are some overriding truths, but for the most
Yes.
part, we don't live our lives that way. We live our lives by these little truths, whether or not you can jaywalk or not, where it's legal, where it's not legal, that, or just like you said, there's so many one ways, but, you know, we as Americans chose to be here because we don't believe in one way. We believe in multiple ways, multiple types of people, multiple perspectives. And I know, like, even growing up and learning science, if I had been taught that this is our current understanding, it would have made me a lot more interested in science because I could resonate with this is what we know now, and you need to get excited to find out what else we know, what else we could layer on top of this. But that's the way all knowledge works. We're like, we come to a conclusion, but it's not really a conclusion. It's a preference in the moment of how we want to proceed. And that preference gets clouded in judgment lots of times. So myself, and I'm not perfect at this because I'm still on the human journey, but during during COVID, I could see all the new judgment coming at us from a lot of new angles. And of course, we had a polarizing political situation too. And I'm just like, no more, no judgment, done. There's no judgment. I was raised in this sort of pseudo Christian upbringing, and we were always taught the judgments at the end of life, but we didn't practice it. And there's a reason why practicing not judging, but in order to practice not judging, you have to practice discernment and preference. There's a difference. And allowing other people to have different truths is part of that process. But you're totally right to be suspecting of anybody who thinks that they're done. Finite truth is discovered and there's nothing else to it. It's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was a teacher for 20 years and I had a principal for a long period of time. And the phrase that he used all the time was, this is our newest best thinking.
Very good on his part. As an educator, that's perfect.
Yeah, right. And I really appreciated that perspective. And when you talk about COVID, there you're absolutely right. There was this new level of judgment and pressure also that
Yeah.
came with that judgment. But what I learned more than anything during COVID was that every person's experience was so different. I was my job during that time actually was supporting educators with how to use technology,
Uh-huh.
how to engage their students as best as possible in those ways. So I was in and out of classrooms all across the county where I lived.
Mm,
And what I saw was that every child's experience was so deeply different.
mm.
And every educator's experience was so deeply different. But then we continued to this system to make expectations the same for everyone. And the judgment that came out of that, especially with kiddos coming back now into school, the expectations are completely unrealistic and impossible for these young humans and the adults as well, who had all of these very disparate and different experiences. And so and that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing all of these people with different experiences pushing against this idea of sameness and judgment. And I think that's where so much of the tension that we're feeling right now on the planet is coming from that, especially from the young people. And my own children are 20 and 18. So I see it in their community as well.
Mhm.
They know, right? They are feeling this tension of what is actually real and what is fabricated, and how do we move forward from there?
Right. Right. Absolutely. And honestly, if you practice not judging, it sends you down these really interesting pathways, and you allow other people to hold their truth. That also sends you down a different pathway. Sometimes my friends will say, well, what about abortion? And I'm like, well, here's a good example, because you have this very altruistic value of pro life, or valuing all life, and you have this very altruistic value of valuing the rights of women, and you actually can't take two divine qualities and fight them. So as long as we remain divided on this issue, we're not going to move forward, because you can't decide what is more important, life or freedom. And it really is intertwined. And all that this conversation is about, the entire intertwining of that and the inclusivity of both values. We will continue to fight. And it's like, to me, it's simple. Both sides are like, they figured out a way to be righteous, and that righteousness is good. Why not be righteous? But judgment along with righteousness degrades the righteousness to nothing.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because, as you said, righteous, I had this response to it, because I think for me, the word righteousness now is embedded with judgment.
Yeah, it is. And it has to be unembedded. So you can be righteous, but you got to know that everyone else could be righteous too. And that's a different way of looking at it, because it is divine to, it is a high vibration, to feel your own preference even, and most people are deeply committed to their preferences. Some people say the same way forever, and that's fine. And some people change a lot. And I think that the world, our ability to communicate with each other around the world all times instantly, has put a new pressure on humanity to open up and really communicate. And we are doing it. Open up and see how other people do things and live, and where are experiments going here and there, and all this knowledge is flooding at us. And our institutions are slow to respond, and they haven't taught us to trust ourselves. Those things erode your own discernment early on, and you listen to the institutions and you lose your own discernment, which is what you need in order to not be judgmental. You need to know how you really feel yourself, and that it could change when you reach new information or new plateaus in your life. And going to your point about menopause, for women in particular, because our whole hormonal structure changes, our perspective easily shifts. And sometimes we go through a bit of a hard emotional time while it's shifting even. And it's like, for me, all the big visionary shifts I took, well, I started my journey years before menopause. I will say that, but there was a new freedom post menopause that didn't exist before, and a new bravery. And I think I said that's my whole diet changed. I mean, everything sort of changed about me, and it was liberating.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
liberating.
Yeah. And this is the post menopause journey, is a story that is not being told enough at this time. Like, there's a lot of focus on perimenopause and menopause, which is important for how we move through that time.
Mhm.
But also that this post-menopause time is so important to hear the stories of this liberation, because perimenopause is a bumpy ride.
Yeah.
Right. I talk to women all the time who are really struggling both physically, emotionally. I am in the thick of it myself.
Mm.
So I can speak from my own experience as well, because yes, everything in my body is changing, everything in my all of my identities, my roles, all of that is shifting and changing, and it's a time of great it's like upheaval all over the place. And knowing and hearing from women who are on the other side of this upheaval gives us something to look toward. So where is it that you are finding the liberation?
Well, first of all, physically, I feel it, not having to make all that blood every month and, put all my energy into that whole, like, reproductive stage of my life, potential reproduction or whatever. And, if you lose, if you run out of eggs, it doesn't just stop, which would be kind of convenient. It continues for another umpteen years. I didn't make my change until 55. So I hung on for quite a while. And I think I had to completely change what I ate, which changed how I felt. It was just really important to skip over to a plant-based diet. Like meat hormones and stuff like that were not resonating with me anymore. Like I mentioned before, I was eating the best of the best and it still wasn't resonating. And my whole body had this whole different electrical current running through it. And I don't know how much of it was physical or chemical or metaphysical, but I was driven. I was a certified nutritional cook at the time, and I studied a lot with the Weston A. Price Foundation, and that was heavy meat and fats diet, and it sent me on a whole other journey to be lighter and more fluid in my thinking. And I don't think I could have done that before menopause, because I think my body really craved the meat, and maybe it's because its hormones were supporting me. But now it's more like it's just it's different. So everything seems to be just don't care anymore as much what other people think too. And I don't know if that's the consciousness shift that's going on in me because I work on it, or just perimenopausal. But I think there's a really funny thing that goes around on Facebook about a woman who's perimenopausal or
Yes,
postmenopausal.
the We Do
We
Not Care
we
Club.
do not
Yes.
care. It's hysterical.
Yeah, I love Just Being Melanie. I love her. She's great.
Right, and it's just like it's not like I find myself I'll go out without makeup, I just don't care.
Yeah.
That was
I'm
part
here.
that's yeah, that's
That's what matters.
right, I mean, I'm here, I show up, I have a lot of knowledge, I don't mind sharing it, sometimes I'm a little "Why aren't you listening?" But, and if I'm not liking a direction in life, I just don't do it, That's kinda interesting too, it's like, you don't feel like you have to be obligated to listen to other people if you don't want to.
And this takes us to what you were talking about, discernment. And I think this is also a really important part of the conversation, because there is so much information coming at us all the time about what to do, what not to do. And for you, it resulted in having a more plant-based diet. And I really like the way you framed that, as that is what worked for me
Mhm.
in the way that you felt it on lots of different levels. What I see happening now for a lot of women is there's so much fear, right? Because at the heart of everything is this, like, fear of decline and death,
Mhm.
right? At the end of the day, that's where the majority of the fear is coming
There's
from.
probably a lot of fear of judgment too. I mean, a lot of people still are people pleasers, especially women.
Yes. Oh god. Yes, absolutely. Actually, this weekend, I just was thinking, I never really thought of myself as a codependent person, but I had this breakthrough of like, "Oh, yeah. No, I really am." Because I can't feel settled until I know that everybody else is feeling okay, and part of that is, like, the
Mhm.
empath in me, and also that construct of it's my role to make sure everybody else feels good and comfortable.
Yeah.
And if we get to that stage, then I can relax and feel good and comfortable. So that was a good it was a good realization for myself this weekend.
And it might be like trust that everybody can take care of themselves. I mean, that's really where we're at. I mean, in this
Yes.
world, is most people, especially young people, they really can ask for their own glass of water.
Yes,
If they're thirsty enough, they will.
they
But
will. Yeah, and it is that. It is trusting that other people can take care of themselves and that their outcomes are not my responsibility.
right. And there's also another layer of trust that I've learned over the years that because I've taken a more multidimensional path, I was raised that there's like Jesus and God, and then there's like nothing really else. But now I know there's angels, there's guides, there's, planets, there's universal forces helping us all the time. There's Mother Earth, all of this, and they can actually do a lot of the work for you. You can become an orchestrator, a co-creator of your life. One time I was going to visit my family. It was just after a recent election, and everybody was kind of mad at each other, and everybody was on edge for 1,000 reasons. And I sent like 1,000 angels ahead of time to work on everybody so we could come together and be a family. And, it's like you can do that. You can actually make this easier on you. And I think when you become freer and less concerned what other people think, you start to be able to access all this other wisdom and find other people that are accessing it. But to your point about discernment, first of all, you have to admit you're judgmental. That's the way we're raised. We're raised, most importantly, to judge ourselves, especially as women. We learn to judge ourselves and to move from judgment to discernment and understanding your own preferences. But you have to find ways to drop into your heart. If you want to, a common way to do it is meditation. But when you drop into your heart, then you can start to feel for real what your heart is saying for you to do. And, there's a million billion ways to meditate, and you don't have to be married to one, or you could be married to one. It doesn't really matter. It's the fact that you pause the fray in your life and get centered in yourself. And when you do that, you start to really know, what do I feel versus what did someone tell me to feel. It's very difficult to unwind all the advice you've been given by everyone to find out what you really want. That's a whole journey in itself. So when you stop judging others and you start meditating, then you can start opening up to what you really want. And I noticed younger people seem to be able to get there faster. It's just older people that are like, wait a minute, we've been on this feisty journey of, especially women, climbing to the top of a company or accomplishing everything around the household at the same time. Journey for so long, it's your knee-jerk reaction is, I can't afford to. And sometimes your knee-jerk reaction is, well, who will do it then? The world survived before you and it will survive after you. You need to get over yourself. Just chill out. Someone told me a story once about a woman who family had not been very thankful to her, and she did all that. And one day she quit. And no more dishes, no more laundry, no more nothing, no more cleaning the house, no more nothing. She didn't say anything. She just quit. And it was about 2 weeks before her husband and her kids were like, so who's going to do the laundry? Who's going to pack our lunches for school? She's like, not me. I quit. And you know what? They didn't die, and it changed the family dynamic and blah, blah, blah. But it's like we really delude ourselves and we're kind of programmed to do this from day one, that we're essential and we're not. Sometimes you're essential in a moment, but moments are not your whole life. If we were essential,
Yes.
we wouldn't die.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
We're just,
And it's a very
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say we're just essential enough to get born, but we're not essential enough to stick around forever.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a very freeing thought, actually. When the world survived without me before I was born and it will continue afterward. And I am in a season where I have lost a lot of people over the
Mm,
last few years. And so I've done a lot of thinking about the strangeness of this world that we come into it, we acquire a whole bunch of stuff, and then one day we exit and other people are left to deal with whatever is left behind. And I was having this conversation with my husband, who lives in a very heightened state of stress a lot of the
Mhm.
time. And I said, it's just a really strange experiment that we're in.
Yeah.
And he was like, that's really helpful.
I'm sure it sounds like he was being facetious.
But he wasn't. He was being sincere
Good.
because, we become so serious
Yeah.
about everything that is happening on a daily basis. And again, like you said, there are moments, right? There are moments where yes, we do have to be tuned in, and this is a serious matter that needs my attention right now, but we can't live in that state all the time, because the absurdity of this world, if you allow it to, will teach you that. This is a very absurd place, and the more we can let go of thinking that we have to be serious and controlling it all the time, because that, my friend, is the giant illusion.
Yeah, it really is. We're co-creating all the time, and um whether you think you're the director of everybody else's life or not is just a it's just a perspective and a delusion at best. It's like we're all co-creating our own lives. And sometimes we're doing it together, sometimes we're co-creating with, for me, like photography, plants. During COVID, um I was as we all changed our directions exponentially during COVID, I was doing a lot more walks. And so I wasn't going into studios and stuff like that anymore. And the flowers started talking to me. And I'm like, dude, I'm not a flower photographer, but you could see us. You could see our energy. And I'm like, and next thing you know, I'm taking pictures of all these flowers, which happened to be extra beautiful that year because there was no pollution and no energy. I live in Washington, D.C., so it was really beautiful that first year. Everybody was playing in the parks, the flowers were happy.
Uh-huh.
And I started taking these flowers and putting them into these mosaics. And I would run into people on the street that looked depressed or sad in their little masks. And I'd say, can I take a picture of you for my portrait project? And I would superimpose all these flowers over their face and I'd send it to them. I did all this for free. And they would always be like, wow, and suddenly they felt better. And it was like the flowers were actually here to shift our consciousness and help us. And then I became this, and, I got more into the consciousness of flowers as time went on, but I did this whole big portrait project and met some really interesting people along the way and made some interesting friends. And I probably did like 100 portraits of people. Every one of them was like, wow. I even did a couple pets that had passed on. I'm like, and superimposed flowers on them to give them some energy on their way. And it was so bizarre to me. And if I hadn't been stopped, paused, even paused in my life, but paused by the COVID, I wouldn't have heard the flowers. Probably. I don't know if they would have knocked on my door anyway, but it was that grand pause that allowed me to go get more metaphysical and surrounding myself with, cues and messages and energy shifts. It's hardly a day now that goes by where I don't have some rapport with the flowers and their words and their wisdom. I made an oracle deck of wisdom I channeled from the flowers, and it even yesterday, a friend that was over and we had some issues going on in our life, and so we pulled cards on them, and it was really great. And I'm working with my mom on her final stages of life in hospice, and everybody's agitated about the progress of things. And so I was getting agitated myself, and the card I pulled was just like soften. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
right, I need to soften my stance on this because that's a journey that's not easy to figure out.
No, it is really challenging, and at this stage, many of us are walking with folks to the end of life.
Hmm.
And, it's this idea of discernment that keeps coming up throughout our conversation, discernment and pausing.
Mm.
And I think those are, for me, the message coming through in this conversation for folks to take away is to stop, drop into your heart,
Yep.
and really let yourself feel. And that's another thing that we have been sort of programmed away from. It's
Hmm.
to live up here and to think. And I'm not saying that thinking isn't important. It is. That is part of it. But also is a connection between our thoughts and how we feel, and knowing that they are not separated.
Right.
That it's those two pieces working in harmony
Hmm.
that actually allow us to make the decisions that are grounded in what is actually best for my own specific journey.
Right. I was just going to add a little science to that. They have shown now through scientific experiments that your information doesn't enter through your brain. Your brain's just a processing tool and it actually enters through your heart. That's why sometimes you'll get bristled or tingles and a lot of the information that goes into your heart goes poof, and some of it goes to the brain and some of it goes to your skin. And the more you pause and meditate, the more you can receive information. And we were taught that everything's in the brain. The heart is for pumping blood. It's
Uh-huh.
incidentally pumping blood. You start to learn that's not completely true when you get stressed out and your heart starts to go like, "Ugh." But
Uh-huh.
but the idea of the pause really allows you to start opening your heart to new ideas, new information, not being afraid of change, but starting to learn how to look forward to it and embrace it and go back to that maybe childlike trust that we had. I mean, when we were little kids, we trusted that our lives were going to work out. Maybe not every single one, but we used to
Uh-huh.
be able to play and not even think about what are we going to be when we're an adult, We lost a lot of that wonder in our seriousness, like you said, over the years. And then the hormonal changes. There are a few people that don't get tossed about them by them, but you're going to change with the hormones and your whole ability to process information is going to change, but it is going to be for the better or it's going to throw you sideways. And even if there's bumps along the road, it's really the pause, the meditation that can make the difference and allowing yourself to go ahead and change. People are like, well, don't you want to run a marathon? And I'm like, I don't do that anymore, but I will go dancing. But I also don't dance all night anymore like I might have at one time.
No. And it also is that stop and that pause that allows us to hear and see what we might not otherwise. And so I'm really curious, how is it that you experience this relationship with flowers? How is it that you hear them?
Well, it's taken me years to get to that point of pausing because I was type A, running an ad agency stuff. But I honestly can't explain it. It's just that it's like I can hear them now saying, just tell them you hear us. The pause caused the shift in consciousness, and the shift in consciousness opened up my communication in ways that I wasn't expecting. I didn't go meditate so I could talk to the flowers. I meditated to lower my stress. That was it, and then the unintended consequences have been this whole other litany of shifts and changes that have come into my life as a result. A lot of people start to meditate just because they did yoga or just because um, they have pain and it's the only way they can get out of pain. There's often lots of forces driving us to develop a meditation process. But I think that we're all extremely clairvoyant from when we're born, and of course, it's easier than others, but you may find that your voice is your tap in. You may find it's knowings that come to you, and you often think it's in your head, but it's actually coming from the dimensions around you. And I honestly think food for me has been a big part of this journey because the more I study food, the more I realize that plants have a higher vibration than meat, and the plants can be transitionary for you. Like you don't have to go meatless, but you could add more greens or pretty high vibrating to your diet. And that opens up your channel. Or the reason I wrote the cookbook on garlic was because using garlic can open your channels. And it's been used forever to do that, to enhance your consciousness. But it also has wellness properties and taste properties that are really fun. So it's like one of those superfoods on all levels. But the idea of using food to open up your channels is something I was really drawn to. And I think that the reason why meat doesn't have the highest vibration is because meat is like people, it carries karma. So, and everything really belongs to this grid. So if a cow one place is treated poorly and a cow another place actually is resonating with it. And so there's this shared consciousness between the cows, and to get them all treated well would raise their vibration. And we're a little ways off from that. But a plant, like a piece of lettuce, yes, the soil could be a little stressed out, but when it grows, it doesn't really have any karma. So it's just right there, pulling new consciousness from the sun, new consciousness from the earth, and you eat that consciousness. So it's like adding the stuff into your life. And flowers, every time, they're just like the plants. Every time they bloom, they're blooming new consciousness that came right out of what the sun is offering and all the evolution the sun's going through and what the earth is doing. And so every time you look at a flower, not so much the ones that grew inside, they're nebulous as to what they're doing. Outside, even weedy flowers are just like, boom, here's some fresh new consciousness. Woo! And if you don't have to think about it or hear them like I do, you can just go out and sit with them, And I think people forever is known sitting in the flowers helps them, makes them feel better. But there's also been a huge amount of people who studied flowers for their energy, but use it as like flower essences. But I'm finding that when you're dealing with fresh flowers, it just all of it is a new consciousness. So you can kind of surround yourself in flowers and they'll help you transition. And a picture of flowers works almost as good as a real flower. And you might get to a point where you're done with the picture of the flower because you've absorbed all the consciousness you can absorb out of it. This is new. This is new stuff. You could go to church and get a message, or you could hire a guru and get a message, or you can ask a flower for a message. It's like, it's out there. It's free. Darwin said once, he considered flowers like an abomination. Like, you would never be able to explain what flowers are actually doing. And I know we think, oh, flowers make seeds and stuff like that, but plants can make seeds without flowers. And they now have small enough instruments that they can measure the energy field around flowers, and they see how bees buzzing their wings actually causes the flowers' energy to get even stronger, and the pollen just pops off onto the bee. Because we're always taught, oh, it rubs. The bees rub themselves all over it, which they still can and do, but really a lot of it's just this polarizing action between positive and negative ions that are just like magically like working, and they all magically know. But they can measure little energy fields around flowers now, and they see that but what they haven't measured is the things that they tell me they do, which is a new energy with a new consciousness. We don't really have great ways of measuring. I mean, they're trying, but there's not great ways of measuring people's consciousness
Yes.
or
Well,
flowers.
because this is a whole other rabbit hole we could go down is
Right.
consciousness and where does it live, and the great question of consciousness, which is it is fascinating, and it's one of my favorite things to think and listen and read about. Just circling back to the flowers for a minute, I think it's, one of my favorite things is actually watching a bee pollinate a flower. It just is miraculous every time I watch it happen, this interaction between these two elements, right?
Both of which are actually fall into that category of magical in what they're doing. Really isn't any kind of evolutionary explanation of how a bee can actually levitate.
Yeah. Yeah. And letting ourselves bask in these simple daily miracles is another really great way of being present, of letting yourself sink into your body. And and then that can be your place of discernment.
Yeah.
Bringing that conversation full circle, because I think often we feel like these big concepts that we talk about have to be difficult and require so much energy and commitment to, when really we can just absorb what's around us. Go outside, get your feet on the earth,
Mm-hmm.
look at the miracles that are around us at all times, and let yourself take in that joy and take in the peace and take in those emotions that come when we allow ourselves to just be and appreciate all of this miraculous abundance that's around us.
Right. And it really isn't something we're taught. And we get so busy. And then that postmenopausal period in your life where you're changing anyway, it's a great time to stop and really start allowing, that to unfold. The older generations do this. We post about it, we podcast about it, we write about it, and younger generations are picking it up like that. They're not gone. They just seem to be a lot more connected more easily. I watch some of them get unconnected through their education systems and stuff, but it's still they'll come back to it, I think, more easily. And because I'm the weird Aunt Karen, I can just keep them like aware that there's more than what they were taught in school.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree.
Their parents are like, they got to get an A. And I'm like, you can work on that. I'm like, I'm making sure that A they got had a little bit of grounding outside the fact that they were able to achieve the A. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, Karin, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing all of your wisdom and your insights. In the show notes, if you'd like to connect with Karin, all of her contact information will be there. The information for her cookbook, for her oracle cards, all of that will be in the show notes. So make sure you check that out. Again, Karin, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for hanging out with me on Transforming 45. If you laughed, nodded, or had an oh wow moment, hit follow and share it with your favorite midlife human. Find me on Instagram at @lboat and keep those transformations coming.
Electric acid.